Right, so I'm going to chat to you today a bit about tracking Agile projects. Quick show of hands, first of all, who would say they are Agile? Interpret that how you want. Okay. Who would like to be more Agile? Okay. So this talk is not going to tell you how to be more Agile, because that's what all the talks are about Agile, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to chat to you a bit about how to track projects, but I'm going to start off with why I think it's important. I swear I didn't touch it. I won't have to get it. Okay, so first of all, just a bit about me so you know where I'm coming from. I started life in the industry as a developer, like I'm sure most of you did, or still.
There's no power thing underneath here.
Sorry?
I was going to say, do you want to plug it in?
I don't think, I mean my screen's staying on.
Oh. Is it going to actually connection on?
Yeah, it might be. I don't know, it might be a dodgy legal screen. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, so I started life as a software developer. I spent quite a lot of time managing projects in basically an agile way, and I now run Softwire's Bristol office, so I kind of look after everything that comes into software development here, selling it, running the projects, all that kind of stuff. And we do bespoke projects, so we see a lot of different clients, a lot of different projects. We have to work in a lot of different ways because all our clients are fussy and have different things to do. And I suppose over the last few years I've spent quite a lot of time trying to sell Agile projects. Is anyone trying to sell Agile, the idea of Agile? It's not easy, is it? So that's kind of where I'm going to start, really. Is a little guide on how to sell an Agile project, because that's where it all begins. So this chap, the CFO, financial guys, they're the tough ones to sell to, and they're often the ones that you need to get on board. And their idea that they're entrenched in, and they live their entire business life through this idea, is I'm going to give you X pounds and I'm going to get Y back. And more's the point, they're going to say, I'm not going to give you X pounds unless you tell me I'm going to have Y. And that's really where they come from. They hold the cards, and that's the way they like to work. They like to know what they're buying. And here's the wrong answer. So it's amazing how many people say this, saying, so we're agile, you don't get that, it'll take as long as it takes, it'll cost you what it costs, and at the end, you'll have what you get. And it's amazing how many people actually believe that this is like a central tenet of Agile and kind of the way it works. And it just doesn't fly. I mean, if you put yourself in that financial guy's shoes, you just wouldn't buy it. And it's not the way to sell it. And a lot of people have this perception about Agile and it's how it runs. So the way you really need to sell it is you need to say, for your X pounds, we will predict that you could get Y, and we'll give you the power to track and control the way that the project varies from that Y and from that X pounds. Now, the argument we all want to latch onto is you don't actually want Y, you really don't want Y. Anything you can think of that you want at the beginning of the project is exactly what you're not going to want by the time you get 3/4 of the way through. That's just the way software development works. But if you're talking to a delivery guy or an IT guy or someone like that, that's the argument you use. But when you're talking to a financial guy, just park it. It's not going to work. It's not really what they're interested in. So you need to give this idea that you're presenting confidence in actually controlling how much it's going to cost and what they're going to get. And I think that's actually quite reasonable, to give the client that element of control over their project. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. So, how do we do that? How do we live up to this promise? We don't want it to be an empty promise and just let them down at the end of the day. And the answer is actually quite simple. It's these three things. You estimate the project at the beginning, and Agile is not an excuse to skip estimation. Many people think that it is, and many people get really caught out by that. You still have to estimate your project, you still need to benchmark where you're going, you still need to have an idea of the plan ahead. You can't just run ahead blind into a project and say, it's fine, it's Agile. people do that and people fall flat on their faces. And once we've done this benchmark, we need to track our change against that benchmark. So we're talking about you're going to get something like Y. So we've defined Y, but then how are we deviating from Y? We need to keep an eye on that and know how the project's evolving as different to the original plan. And then the last point is really tracking progress, tracking how far we are from where we started to the finish line, however you want to define that finish line. I guess points 1 and 2 could be a different talk, and I'm going to talk about point 3. So, here's your practical guide to tracking progress. It's an interesting topic to me because if you talk to some sort of very, Agile evangelists, the very sort of original purveyors of Agile, they'll tell you there's one true way. And a lot of the Agile textbooks will focus on this one true way. And it is how much you've got done. It's how much functionality you've delivered into the wild, or that's ready to go into the wild. And that's a nice idea. It's kind of neat. Saying, yeah, you're as far through as the amount of stuff that you've actually coded and delivered and deployed. And that is kind of the message when it comes to when it comes to Agile. However, this would be a very short talk if I was saying that's all there is to it. So what I'm going to do is to introduce you to a little problem. And this is a burnout chart. So does everyone know what a burnout chart is? Anyone not know what a burnout chart is? I should give a very quick instruction. So y-axis is the amount of stuff done, measured in points, which is essentially an arbitrary complexity measure. And x-axis is time. So it's how much you're getting done over time. And the angle of that line is your velocity, which is kind of the key Agile measure. So this is taken from a real project, and it's actually really how we did. And you'll notice that at 4 weeks, isn't that very good? If you looked at this graph after 4 weeks, and you're saying, right, so how long is this project going to take? We've got about 200 and something points of functionality we want to get done. It's going to be about 5 years. Not a happy answer for the client there. Really doesn't look very pretty at all. And this is where we diverge from the Agile textbooks. The Agile textbooks are really written around long-running projects of kind of essentially infinite duration, where it's typically product development, product just being ongoing, developed over time, never dies. It's years since it was born, that kind of a project. So you're talking kind of the Twitters and Amazons out there, that kind of situation. Whereas the stuff we deal with is much shorter. So our projects are typically anywhere from a couple of months to a year. And the shorter projects are actually nearly all beginning and end. So if you took the middle month out of here and sort of shunted it together, there's no stable period in it. So there's no actual good measure of velocity and how long it's going to take you by this graph. You don't know what the shape of the curve is going to be while you're partway through. Simply got no idea. So we've got a problem, and we need to fix it. One of the things we can do. So the Agile way is everything's about functionality. You only do what's needed to achieve that functionality. You ain't going to need it approach. So you only build the absolute minimum amount necessary in order to deliver each piece of functionality as you go. And that's the pure Agile way. You build it little bit by little bit by little bit. But we're in the real world here, and that's not really very practical. We want to put in all this wonderful automation infrastructure, which the Agile world also says is brilliant, but doesn't give us any facility to track in our burnout chart. So we've got all this automation structure about continuous deployment, running loads of automated test suites that all have to be set up. There's a lot of investment that goes into that. And similarly, the true Agile way is to build each little bit of code as you need it. But actually the much more practical way is we know that we're going to have to deliver a complete data model before it's actually in use. We've got like an MVP in our minds, and we're developing at least to that minimum viable product, and so it's stupid to just develop like a tiny bit of the data model and just do one column in one table to begin with. You know, you may as well put the whole data model in there, put your object relational mapping infrastructure in there, all those kind of things that you need as an investment into the future of the project. So let's count that stuff. Let's give it a points value. Okay, it's breaking the rules, but it's a really good way to break rules. Project. So basically what you'll see with these slides, so the red line is is putting in technical stories into the project backlog. So we put in technical stories for all this infrastructural stuff and give it a points value, a genuine points value. And when you see that, it's essentially the blue and the red line track each other after a while. The red stuff all comes first, and then the two are pretty much parallel. But it starts to paint a better picture. We can see that after 4 weeks, we've actually, we've achieved quite a lot. We've made this technical investment and it's paid off and we've completed that. So suddenly it's not such an ugly picture. But still, if you were to look at this after 4 weeks, when's the end date? It's still a couple of years. I mean, it's bad. This is supposed to be a 3-month project. So what's wrong with this picture? Why doesn't it tell us what we need? And the answer's really here. Development isn't just like you look at a piece of functionality and bang, it's there, magic. We'd all like it to be that quick, but it isn't. It takes a while to get things through to done. Things start off, you'll be refining a specification, you'll be writing some tests and some code in one order or the other. You'll be getting that stuff reviewed, it'll be verified, the output, it'll go through some sort of acceptance testing, and it'll be released to some definition of release. Maybe it's the wild, maybe it's some sort of staging environment. And our previous measure of done was just at the end. Well, that is our measure of done, and that's the only metric that we were using on our graph report. But this pipeline takes a while to build up. There's quite a lot of stuff that flows into it at the beginning of the project, and it doesn't start flowing out until you've got a certain way through. So actually, why don't we have a look at what's in the pipeline? That's an interesting thing, to know what's in that pipeline as well as what's come out yet. So, let's draw another line on our graph. And this red line here, so the blue line here is the red line from the old graph, which is including technical stories. And the red line is including all that, but it's what we started. And it's nothing. So, it actually shows what's going into the pipeline. And if you see, that's actually a really steady climb, right from the start of the project, up until we're getting towards the end, up until the pipeline's starting to empty. And that's quite an interesting observation. It's actually saying, despite what that blue line was telling us, we are actually doing something, something's happening at a fairly steady rate in this project. And there's a really interesting observation around week 4, which is the moment I was bricking myself before, which is that there's a really big gap between the red line and the blue line. And that is the size, the amount of stuff that's in the backlog. So suddenly, we actually get a Kanban view of the work in progress. So Kanban is the idea of limiting work in progress and keeping a very close eye on anything that's half done or has been begun that isn't complete. And we instantly get that Kanban view on a burnout chart, which is exactly what burnout charts, they're never designed to do that in the first place, but we've suddenly got this extra piece of information. It's a really useful piece of information, because at the 4-week mark here on this project, there were loads of blockages. We had various dependencies on third parties from the development team, and everything was queuing up behind them, and that was actually the real cause of the problem. But the purpose of this was then to take it to the client and demonstrate, A, that we're making progress, so they don't need to jump up and down quite as badly as they thought they did, and B, that we have a problem that we need their help to solve, because they're the ones empowered to actually remove this blockage. And it allows us to demonstrate that really clearly. So suddenly, we're giving our client a much better control and view over the project, which is exactly what we were promising them when we sold it to them. But we've completely broken the whole kind of agile idea of only ever worrying about what you've done. And And that's still something we shouldn't forget. I'm not for a moment suggesting that your primary metric should be the red line on this chart. That would be madness, because actually it is really important how much you've got done, and that is actually more important. And certainly when you're starting towards the end of the project, that's kind of the only thing that matters. You just want to let go of the red line once you kind of got towards your last month. It's all about that blue line. It's all about pushing those last bits through. So I'm going to give you 2 take-home points, Ric's 2 things at the end. First one is, if you're making some tech investment, give it some points value. You're giving it monetary value, you're calling it an investment, okay? You think it's worth something. So if you think it's worth something, why shouldn't it have points? It's just a logical thing to do. So give it that value and respect that value. And the second is to not obsess about points done. I've introduced some other metrics that you can use, and I'm not suggesting that you should just use those metrics blindly and always apply them. The whole point that I'm trying to get across is that you need to find the metric that works for you and apply that and make it work for you. You don't want to just blindly follow the pattern that the textbook lays out for you. And finally, I'm going to finish well ahead of time. And finally, just to show that I'm not alone in this crazy thought, who knows about ThoughtWorks? Everyone? You know about ThoughtWorks? Okay, ThoughtWorks is kind of like a thought leader in Agile development, and they publish a periodic called Tech Radar, which I thoroughly recommend you read. It's got loads of stuff that anyone who is willing to come into this group, to this meetup, must find interesting. Thoroughly recommend the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. And in their latest Tech Radar, which was released in January, they specifically pulled out worrying too much about velocity as kind of something not to do. And they drew a parallel, which I quite liked, between velocity and yesterday's weather. So velocity will tell you what the weather was like yesterday, whether it was a good day yesterday or you had a good week last week, but it tells you absolutely nothing about the future. And okay, that's an exaggeration. It might tell you something about the future, but it certainly doesn't predict it. And to latch onto it too much is likely to land you in some trouble. Okay, finished. Way ahead. Any questions?
What tools do you use?
What tools do I personally use, or would I recommend? Or
Yeah, for tracking.
Yeah, Google Docs is one of my favourite tools, because I find the actual traditional tools, like Jira and Mingle, and there's one by Rally, they're 10 a penny, aren't they? There's loads of these project tracking things, TFS, if you're in the .NET world, all that kind of stuff. They can actually be a bit clunky and restrictive for burnout charts in particular. And they can pull you into that idea of obsessing at one way of doing it. So what I actually tend to do is pull the steps out into a Google spreadsheet and draw up some Google charts based on them. And just do that on a weekly basis, just pull out some stats and whack it in there. Because it gives you the flexibility to then play with it and actually look at some things that you wouldn't necessarily look at if it was just within a traditional tool.
What are your thoughts on tools like Trello?
Trello's great. I really like Trello, but it's very lightweight, and that's its strength and its weakness. Yeah, I mean, if you want to just really, I find Trello's better for kind of not development stuff. I think it's. Did you see? Who saw the Nodecopter guy? Who saw it? Who was here? It was quite an early talk, right? It was great. A guy has little helicopters that take off, little drones that move around, and he programmed them using Trello. That's the coolest thing I've seen with Trello by miles. He kind of dragged things into the to-do list, instructions like take off and do a flip and stuff, and then he press. Anyway, I digress. But Trello is really cool for like playing around with things like that. But I think for a development tool, I personally find it a bit lightweight. I mean, I like to track more stuff. Defects, how do you tag them to other stories? how do you interrelate stuff? It's a bit weak on that kind of thing.
The main reason I asked is probably, I think it's notoriously difficult to get developers to use time tracking and logging tools and things like that. They like things like GitHub issues or Trello is a quite good example because it's stuff, but engineered in a nice, light, simple way that doesn't feel like a burden and doesn't distract you too much from the tasks that you have.
It's a good way to ease people into it. If you're trying to convert people, it might be a good first step. We use Jira as our kind of main thing. We're big fans of the Atlassian toolset. So yeah, we use them mostly because you can kind of make that lightweight or heavyweight quite nicely. You don't have to track time in it. It doesn't even ask. I don't even know if you can track time in it. We certainly never tried.
Imagine a developer in your team has a story and he discovered that there is a bug that blocks him, so you can't really deliver the story. Or maybe you can, but this is the question. Are you willing to put a bug for that particular problem, or rather you are trying to deliver the story without any bugs? I mean, do you allow to create bugs?
Yeah, there's not a clean answer to that. There's two things you can do when issues come up. You can either block your story on it and raise a defect and wait for that defect to be resolved before the story's done. Or you can cheat, which is what I quite often do, which is you raise another story.
Yeah, exactly. We'll create another story of that.
Yeah. But you just got to think who you're fooling. You know, if you've got to keep your goal in mind. Why are you doing it? Why is one way better than another? And base a decision on that, because there isn't a right answer. It's not always right to do X or always right to do Y. It depends on your circumstances. You've got to actually really think about what you're trying to achieve by what does it matter if you pass it or fail it? You know, are you doing it to impress someone, keep someone happy, or are you doing it to keep yourself happy? Either way, are you lying to yourself by doing it one way, or are you actually helping yourself by giving a better representation of where you are?
Yeah, I see. So there's just no straight approach.
No, I don't think so. I think all that I would say is try and keep the points representations as realistic as possible. So, for example, if you do move it out to another story, maybe you should drop the points value of the story that you're putting through.
Thank you.
Can you say something about how you track the tasks to do the infrastructure and the building system and testing? Do you do that exactly the same as the main products, or there seems to be, I would have thought there's some unique features of that infrastructure which makes it different to the products? Yeah,
so you try and track it as similarly as possible, I'd say, but it won't go through exactly the same process, like you say. So particularly the sign-off end. So it might just leap from kind of getting reviewed to done and skip the whole acceptance process, because once it's done, it's done. There's no one to kind of say it's right or not. You know, it's typically the person who's done it who knows whether it's right or not. So you might want to just jump it over the last bit. There's no real answer to that. You've got to think about how similar it is to your stories, whether the stakeholders are the same, whether you want the same people to sign them off. You know, whether you need to who do you need to convince? Who do you need to convince that you've delivered value? And do you need to show it to them to actually prove that the value's there? That's an interesting question to ask.
Cool, Johnny, thank you.